always say, what the heck do you mean by brand? Sometimes it's more inappropriate than that even. I'm a brand consultant, and I think a lot of people smile and nod and they pretend they know what that means or why it's important. But I've built a business around this for the last 13 years. So I want to tell you why brand is really important, especially given some current situationships in the world of marketing and branding. So what is brand? Well, I saw a meme on social media that I want to riff off a little bit, which is, in the dating world, flirting is a little bit like marketing, right? It's looking good, it's smiling pretty. Asking somebody out on a date is kind of like sales. It's the, call to action. It's trying to close the deal on the date. Branding is what makes somebody say yes. It's the whole package. It's the trust, the interest, the playfulness, if you will, that makes somebody say yes. So I love that as a metaphor for understanding brand, because I think a misconception of branding or brand is that it's simply your logo. Or some people think of it as maybe it's your logo, your colors, and your fonts. Some people are a little more sophisticated in thinking about it as your messaging and all of those other things. But I want you to understand that brand is really the memory, the reputation, the understanding. It's what people think of you, which might encompass some of those brand elements like your message or your logo or your colors or your fonts, your vibe or your images. Those are all component pieces. You can control all of those things. But truly your brand, that memory, your takeaway, is not really something you can control, because it's what your audience takes from you. And that right there is why it's so important, so often misunderstood. Why you need to be so in tune with what your brand is, how are you showing up in the marketplace? Because you control all that stuff you put out in the world, your content, your images, but if you aren't taking the pulse of your audience, and is your audience receiving what you're intending, then there is a mismatch, and your brand might be very far from what you intend it to be. So I have some tips for you. I'm gonna review, and I want to put it in the context of artificial intelligence. Often, ChatGPT is being used in marketing for a lot of content creation. There's other tools out there. The problem I see for brands and for you trying to impact your branding is there's so much more. We've always said there's so much noise in marketing. There's so much content you're competing with for attention and making memories with your customers. With AI tools now churning out blog posts, social media content, video editing, there's only that much more being created. So the work of you standing out is really important. I think the good news in that is that if you take an approach that is putting in the work and being authentic and wanting to differentiate yourself, it'll stand out more and more, because we all see all this content all the time, and you're like, oh, that's chat. And those of us in the business, the reason we know it's chat is because there's a style with which ChatGPT writes content. And so it's not that it's a bad tool, and it's not that you can't sort of get started or use it to support your efforts and creativity, but we can tell when people are cheating. And the reality is that brands that are relying on it and not putting in the work, they're not differentiating themselves. So you have a huge opportunity in this landscape to show up, because you will look real and you will sound real, and you won't be just like everybody else using chat. The other challenge here, and the reason why your brand is so important, putting in the effort with your brand, is, unless you're a corner store only selling to foot traffic, so many brands are truly competing on a global stage for attention and for a customer base. So it's not just competing with the people who are advertising your local paper anymore, right? Like, your brand elements are being judged more broadly. So that increased marketplace, that increased competition pool puts more pressure on you to have to compete. So some mistakes that are very, very common, and we see this with folks who are just starting out with a business. We see this with very established organizations. But it really goes to resource allocation, and it's all about putting the right amount of time and effort into those brand assets. We talked about at the start, they're brand assets. It's your logo, it's your look and feel, your vibe, your colors, your fonts, your messaging. Without a lot of good foresight into those things, if they're just kind of coming together piecemeal or organically over time, your brand won't be cohesive, your brand won't be strong, and it's not going to be situated to compete against all those competitive forces we just talked about. So while I am a huge fan of doing things on a shoestring, of prioritization of your resources, no matter what size your business or organization, attention to your brand, I think, is paramount, because whether you are fighting for advocacy attention, dollars from donors, sales from customers, skimping on consistency in your branding and being good at what you put out is going to harm you. And I think we see this with clients who, you get really busy, and so you pull back on your investment in your marketing, you pull back on creating new content, you pull back on developing the next thing because your business is doing so well. But what happens is when that momentum dries up a little bit, you have nothing in the pipeline. And so consistently branding, consistently putting in the resources on the front end are so important to that continual payoff and setting you up for success. Another thing that we see folks try to do is go to market a little too soon. So not thinking through doing the hard work. It's really hard to, whether it's coming up with your brand name, whether it's coming up with, a logo or positioning, and just sort of launching a business and then iterating from there. It's related to what we just talked about, but you can create brand confusion. And so putting in that time to get it right at the start before you go to market, so buying an ad or showing up on a stage under a certain brand umbrella, and then 3 months later decide, missed the mark, didn't quite mean that, want to do something different. I'm all for iteration, but what you're going to do is you create a little distrust in the market in terms of, well, is that the same brand? Are they the same people? Kind of liked the person I met last time, but I think it was she was in a different business. Maybe she left that business. Maybe that one closed. So you want to be careful that you iterate quietly. And we're all for beta testing. So what I mean by that is if you're starting out and you're coming up with a new brand identity, or you want to name or change your name, to test it quietly amongst a closed group of friends and family or trusted confidants, not testing out your essence in a very public space. And so there's a big difference there. And it can be frustrating because we've worked with a lot of business owners who either are rebranding or they're just starting out. They're just so excited to take their product or idea to market. And this part holds them back and it frustrates them. But it's so important to get that right before you take that product or idea to market. And I would say the third biggest sort of roadblock we see with brands in building strong brands is being inconsistent. So let's say you put all that time and effort and you did it right. You took the time, you invested the resources. So you have strong branding, you have strong messaging, you've built out all your assets, and you're trying to build your brand in the marketplace. But you're not applying all those things you did consistently time and time and time again. And we see this with organizations who change their colors in their background of their ad, or a new headline every other day, or a different call to action. And so you're not branding is right. Remember, it's creating that takeaway. It's what people remember. And so it's the Nike just do it. When's the last time they've changed their tagline, right? Part of their brand, we remember it because of that consistency. And so coming up with what's consistent in your business will help build that brand that people remember. So while it's fun to be creative and it's fun to play around and try new things, you have to do it within a narrow scope. You have to make sure that you are showing up consistently across website, business cards, social media accounts, advertising, a flyer you leave on the bulletin board, no matter what it is, people should be able to start to associate with what they see and remember who it's from, because it all is showing up together. And it goes back to that fighting this huge landscape of competitors and competitive noise in the marketplace. Your brand has to show up so many times. I mean, you'll read 30 articles, you'll get 30 different advice points here, but the point is whether someone needs to see your company 10 times, 20 times, 30 times, 40 times to remember it is irrelevant. We know it's a lot. They need to see it a lot, and it needs to look the same, or else they're not going to make that connection. Plus, consumers are only giving microseconds to what they're seeing, because we are being just inundated with so much competitive content. So your brand has to not only show up a lot, show up consistently, but it also has to be just clear and concise, or else people are not going to get what you're trying to say. So, to conclude, the things you can control are putting the time and effort into getting your name, your logo, your positioning, all of those brand assets right up front. Put the resources to it. This is not the place to be cutting corners. There's a lot of other places in marketing where you can be super scrappy, but having a tight, strong set of brand assets and brand positioning is not the place to be scrappy. And third, it's make sure you're consistent. Do the work, but then keep applying it over and over and over again. If you're bored of saying it, it's probably a good sign. You can get creative around the edges, but at the essence, if you are trying to control your reputation, your brand, then you need to be very, very consistent. And extra bonus tip here is, and I mentioned this at the very start, check in with your audience. Are you being perceived the way you're trying to be? Because if your audience is taking away a memory or an essence of you that is not in cahoots with what you're trying to do, then you have more work to do. You have to go back to that brand building basics, because something is out of alignment. But you're not going to know if you don't go and look. So don't be afraid to check out how your customers or your followers, what they think you are from time to time, to make sure that your brand is hitting the mark. So that is What the Heck is Brand. And I'm Jennifer Mulchandani, the founder and CEO of Arlington Strategy. Take care.